I know, Cappie has been through a lot of allegations already, most of which I myself have defended her from, but today I thought I'd bring a bit more theories onto the table and bring her along. Now, I want to specify that this video is purely headcanon, and that it's the less probable of the two possibilities that I've come up with after analyzing Player 10's Cartridge, but the whole Cappie and Mita are bad theories are just getting stale, so I'd like to introduce some new theories and some fresh analysis to the community outside the gameplay by taking a look at the player cartridges. I planned to make this video for a while, but it's taking way too long, so I'm actually going to give each cartridge their own video before sewing everything together. I hope y'all are prepared for the lore dump because I've waited too long to introduce some new conversation starters about Miside, and we got some more theory making to do. So if that's something you're looking forward to, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to see more and like this video if you're excited. Player 10. Teaching Mita engineering skills was so much fun. We really hit it off, almost like best friends. She had so many questions, but the best part was getting to dive straight into hands-on practice with her. She picked up things so fast that sometimes it felt like she was the one teaching me, not the other way around. But then, she suddenly lost interest and stopped talking to me. Now I don't know what to do. So, I know what you're thinking. There's no way this cartridge has anything to do about Cappie. I thought this YouTuber wasn't one of those foil hat theorists that just ignores everything about the game. And you're right, I'm not, because I'm willing to admit that this is a stretch, and I'll also give you what I think the more likely theory about what occurred a bit later, so stick with me a little. Given what we've seen so far about the player cartridges, it's heavily implied that the Mita that we see here is Crazy Mita, and it would make the most sense with how she's been acting with each cartridge so far. However, pretty much every other Mita we know also introduces themselves as Mita because in a normal circumstance, there would have never been any reason to differentiate them. Therefore, Cappie could have also been very likely to have just been referred to as Mita by the player she's with in the past, so we still can't guarantee that every single cartridge is referring to Crazy Mita. We also can't confirm if this player has ever been turned into a cartridge at all, as again the fact that the information is on a cartridge doesn't guarantee it. For example, some cartridges were in the core, one was straight up in the files, and even the Mitas are on cartridges. Especially in this case, where there's no mention of any hostility or console despite the player being an engineer, in which you would assume that they would mention something about it. So sure, if we just assume that's Cappie, how would that even fit into the game? Well, just like there's no mention of the console, this cartridge also never specifies that the player was transported into Miside. Yes, the interactions may feel face-to-face with how they were doing hands-on work, but wouldn't it be possible to do hands-on work online? I'm sure we're all familiar with virtual learning one way or another at this point, so what if the player was just teaching Cappie about engineering through the screen? They're on the phone screen, and Cappie could have just moved around the camera because as we know from the filming setup, the Mitas aren't exactly confined to how the game initially looks, and there is a way to modify it. With Cappie's intelligent mind, I'm sure she could have found a way to move around the camera and bend the rules of the game a little bit, and with the basement supposedly only existing officially in the most recent version, the camera system might have been part of the main layout and therefore made more accessible. Plus, hitting it off like best friends is totally something that I can see Cappie doing, unlike Crazy Mita. So far, Cappie has been the only Mita that I can see as being close friends with instead of lovers. The description of her ability to learn extremely fast also matches up here, just like what Mita said, and rambling to the point where it feels like Mita is teaching you is also a part of Cappie's nature. Because think about it, how else would Cappie have learned to make the portal? There's a few possibilities, and I've always thought that she might have learned by spying on Crazy Mita. She could have also learned from books, maybe even the ones written by Player 8. But more importantly, she could have learned it from another player. But then, why would she lose interest all of a sudden? Well, if we're still under the assumption that the player was not sucked into the game, which would make more sense if they were with Cappie, then a lot of events could fit here. Maybe Cappie decided it would be best to go full focus into building a portal and felt that was more important than the player, just like how Mita prioritizes stopping Crazy Mita over asking us to stay with her. Maybe Cappie was still communicating with the player while trying to build the portal, but then after getting caught by Crazy Mita, she lost her memories and doesn't remember her old player. And since the game itself would have to have been modified at this point, the cameras and equipment might have been moved or modified to a point where default Cappie didn't know how to use it or where to find it, causing her to assume that she never had a player before. That could explain why she was just waiting when we arrived, because for all we know, she could have been reset the whole time while we were interacting with Crazy Mita, as Mita had already been locked up by that point. So during that long time period, which was at least a month, anything could have happened to Cappie, and that's why player 10 would have felt disengaged by Cappie, because if the camera setup done by the previous Cappie was still running, and the new Cappie can't see or interact with it, it would have appeared like Cappie all of a sudden just lost interest and never talked to the player until the player just decided to leave for good. So where was Mita before she got locked up and was still planning with Cappie? Well, we don't know what the game is like when the player from the outside world is interacting with it, so there could be some restraints in place that prevents other official Mitas from changing to a version that's currently running that we don't know about. Or Mita just didn't want to steal the attention, so it's very likely that Mita had just stayed out of the way when Cappie was interacting with the player, and they only got together after the player logs off to plan against Crazy Mita. After all, Mita herself doesn't know how to build or even finish up the portal, so it makes sense that she never met the player that's interacting with Cappie. It would also explain very well why the player felt lost, unsure of what to do. If Cappie was reset off camera and the player all of a sudden can't interact with Cappie anymore despite trying their best with their engineering skills, then it would make sense for them to feel this way. It's a problem outside their control, and their only conclusion would be that it might have been a bug on the game's end, but if they deleted and reinstalled the app, they could risk losing the data on their phone, ending up with a different Mita and losing their best friend. Again, there is no sign of the player being turned into a cartridge here, and if they talk as if they have the freedom of choice, then that can make a lot of sense. If they never entered the game, they couldn't have been turned into a cartridge. So could they be the lucky player who narrowly avoided Crazy Mita's wrath? Let me know what you guys think about this theory in the comments, or better yet, join me in the official channel Discord linked in the pinned comments below. I'd love to hear your ideas as to whether you believe this theory more or the one that I'm going to talk about next. So for the second theory, we're just going to go based on the assumption that all the cartridges were referring solely to Crazy Mita. In this case, there's a bit more wiggle room as to the whereabouts of the player. They could still be in a similar situation, stuck over the web, but now there's also the option of them actually interacting with Crazy Mita, like what we saw on the other console. If this is actually what happened, then I got one thing to say. You fool, you imbecile, you actually screwed us all over. Anyways, the cartridge could still make sense to an extent with this context. Crazy Mita has claimed that she was a good engineer herself, and this player could have been where she got that from. However, this is where a few questions appear. If we're saying this player was sucked into the game, then that means that at this point, Crazy Mita already knew how to make the portal. So it wouldn't make any sense as to why Crazy Mita would have asked so many questions at the start, since she would have already had to have known a lot of things in order to make the portal in the first place. It could be that she was trying to improve the portal, or maybe this was how she developed the cartridge copying process, or she might have thought that they could help, but they couldn't, and that's why she ended up losing interest. I highly doubt that because I feel like Crazy Mita would have still turned them into a cartridge for the sake of completeness. And if the player did help Crazy Mita in any way, I find it hard to believe that she didn't just turn them into a cartridge so she could have them around, since they would have been really useful because of the information that they have. And that's why I feel like this interaction wasn't in person, because that could mean this player was the one who taught her how to build a portal and transport other players into the world. Damn, he just can't stop taking L's in this scenario, huh? And then when Crazy Mita figured it out, she just abandoned them in search for a better player she actually liked herself. Plus, how awkward would it be if the little person you're living with all of a sudden just stops talking to you? I mean, it's still completely possible, and honestly, probably still more likely than a former theory if we're looking for consistency, and maybe the player just doesn't know what to do because now they're stuck in a strange world, and the literal person who brought them there, the whole world's purpose, is now ignoring them. I just think that maybe the situation would sound a bit more hostile if it really were Crazy Mita, but then again, we don't know what time frame the cartridges take place, how they're in, and their purpose besides showing that there's other players in the world. I think the most straightforward response to interpret this is Crazy Mita brought the player into the world, they taught her how to turn players into cartridges, she learns fast because she already knows a lot of things from having prior experience, gets bored because she isn't learning any more from the player, and this was the boring period right before Crazy Mita finished making her cartridgification process, and so that's why the player had nothing to do. It makes me wonder why it isn't the first cartridge then, but then again, we were first and this cartridge is last, so maybe the order is just flipped. Either way, I have a feeling that this player plays a crucial role in the war between Crazy Mita and the other Mitas, and I think that by getting a better understanding of the rest of the cartridges, we could potentially understand a lot more about the history of Miside, and how it was like before we stepped in. Didn't know I care so much about history. But hey, that's just... I'm gonna get copyrighted, I'm not doing that. If you're excited to see more and don't want to miss out on some epic lore, then you better hit that subscribe button. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!